Motorola, famous for things like radios and your grandpa's old flip phone. Hello? Tim Cook. But did you know that for a brief, weird, and glorious year in the mid-90s, they made an absolutely terrible Macintosh clone? So join me as we explore this Motorola StarMax 3000 DT from 1996 and see if we can look past its many, many shortcomings to find something here to love. So stay tuned. And if you enjoy spending inordinate amounts of time tinkering with the most obscure computers that eWaste has to offer, I hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel. The Apple juggernaut that we know today keeps their hardware and software under their proprietary iron grip. But things weren't always so rosy. Back in the mid-90s, Apple was basically a lost cause, bleeding market share to the Windows Intel monstrosity and flirting with going broke. In 1994, in an attempt to win back market share, Apple began to license the Mac OS to third-party computer companies. Unthinkable today. And those companies would build compatible machines that would run the Mac OS and theoretically win back some market share. Unfortunately for Apple, a lot of those clones wound up being more powerful and less expensive than Apple's own offerings. Except for Motorola, who must have taken pity on Apple because they squeezed out this turd. But don't take my word for it. Here's clone expert and possible Macintosh clone himself, Steve from Mac84.
Good evening. I am Steve from Mac84, and let me show you my turds. These three systems are the oddballs in my Macintosh clone collection. You see, they all share something similar in common. They're all terrible. While other Macintosh clones were trying to push the boundary of what a Macintosh could be, these stood firmly and said, no, let's be mediocre. And that's exactly what these systems are. They share the identical logic board to each other, so unfortunately, they all have the same problems. Sure, they may have other terrible attributes, but the logic board is where it all starts. First, you have one SCSI port, and that doubles as your external SCSI port. So if you want an internal SCSI drive, you're going to have to do some weird termination and chaining things, and that usually doesn't turn out that well. There's also some weird choices about memory. You have 3 slots for memory, but don't go sticking that module anywhere you want. There are rules to be followed. Unfortunately, hardware and software compatibility isn't 100% great with these machines, which is weird because we'll get into this one in a second. But unfortunately, things like built-in networking weren't an option on these models. So what did they do? They gave you a PCI card, which may work great with System 7, but maybe not with Mac OS 8 or anything else. So there were a lot of other problems you had to overcome. So what's so weird about this machine, the third in our Macintosh turd trio? This third crusty clone was made by Apple themselves. That's right, Apple designed the logic board that went in all 3 of these clones, and they decided to make it mediocre. So it seems Apple is to blame for this confusing trio of convoluted clones. Everything from their logic board to their neutered startup chime is all their fault. If only there were a better way, a better company that made better clones. Oh, now that's better. I'm clearly not biased between one clone company and another, but these are a bit less crappy.
Thanks, Steve. The UMac SuperMac is actually a great example of just how pitifully limited this StarMax is. Both machines came out in 1996, but the UMacs can be upgraded to a little over a gigabyte of RAM, whereas this thing can only take 160 megabytes. The CPU on this thing is on a daughter card, and it can actually get a dual CPU configuration. I've personally upgraded this thing to a 1 gigahertz G4. It was able to run Mac OS X. The StarMax? Yeah, that CPU is soldered to the motherboard. Anyway, I want to crack this thing open, see if we can toss in a few upgrades and make it a little more livable. Right after this quick word about today's sponsor, PCBWay. Not only does PCBWay offer high-quality PCB prototyping and production, but they also offer things like 3D printing, assembly, injection molding, and tons of fabrication services. Right now, PCBWay is running their KiCad open source design contest. Use KiCad to showcase your creativity and technical skills, and submit a project themed around either communication or automation. There are a bunch of neat prizes on offer, and a bunch of great submissions in the gallery already in case you need some inspiration. So make sure you check the link down below in my description. And as always, if you have any PCB or prototyping needs, this is the perfect time to give PCBWay.com a try. Now, despite all the ragging we just did on this thing, these clones actually do have some kind of fun, redeeming features. Like, check this out. Here is a Packard Bell PS2 mouse, and you might think, you can't use that with a Macintosh, that's ridiculous. Well, you can on this clone because these things have PS2 mouse and keyboard ports in addition to ADB. Additionally, this thing has VGA video. You can use any old VGA monitor. Not too shabby. And this seems pretty straightforward to take apart. Just 3 screws on the back here. And yep, case just slides right off. And yeah, here's that unfortunately soldered on CPU, an Ethernet card, which is very nice. Let's get this old crusty Seagate hard drive out of the way. Remove this support bracket and the PCI riser. And here we have access to our 3 RAM slots, and look at that. There is your SCSI out, which is just internal SCSI routed to an external connector. That is pretty hilarious. Yeah, I wonder if I have any more RAM sticks we can shove in here. For now, I'm going to put in a 64 meg stick, along with the other sticks that were already in there, so we can hopefully install the original system software. And I'll replace this old 1.2 gigabyte Seagate IDE hard drive with a nice 16 gigabyte CF card on an adapter on another adapter. As is tradition, let's see if this will boot the StarMax System Restore CD. So we got to flashing floppy disk and the mouse works, so that's a good sign. Let's try to install the original StarMax system software. It does not see our CF card. Alright, I found a combination of adapters that work, and aside from looking ridiculous, we now see our, well, it only sees 8 gigabytes on there. It's a 16 gigabyte card. Oh well, let's format it, I guess. Well, this does not bode well. Okay, so after much kerfuffling, it turns out this stupid thing does not like any of my adapters for CF cards, and it just ignores any of these larger sticks of RAM, even the 64 megabyte stick, which I guess this can only take up to a 32 meg stick, so I'm just gonna stick a slightly larger 4 gigabyte Quantum Apple branded drive in there, and we're gonna see if we can have some fun with this thing, dang it. Okay, well, now that we have a suitably mediocre set of internal components that His Royal Highness Motorola approves of, we can go ahead and reinstall macOS 7.6, the StarMax version. Although first I'm going to initialize this hard disk with 2 partitions for reasons that will become apparent later. Alright, initialize, custom setup, 2 partitions. Alright. We'll call this one Motorola Sucks. And we will call this one Motorola Sucks. We'll run the install. Complete restore install. Drag the hard disk to here. What? That's weird. But, alright. Alright, install was successful. Let's just set the right startup disk here. That Motorola Sucks. Alright, booting into a Motorola themed macOS 7.6. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad to see that it works, and I wish it worked with some better hardware, or at the very least, more memory. Yeah, look at that. We've got launcher at the bottom with CyberDog, America's favorite web browser. Launches into a welcome to StarMax screen. Yeah, I don't need your Motorola propaganda here. I already know it's terrible. Let's take a look at about this computer. Yep, we have our 34 megs of RAM here. And yeah, I mean, we could play around with some of the software that's on here. We could try to install games on here and see how terrible they run. But I have a different idea of fun, and if you've been around here for a while, you might have an idea of what that is. Yeah, we're going to install the PowerPC version of BOS on this thing. And running BOS on here is actually kind of fitting, because when Steve Jobs returned to Apple and realized that the clone program was in no way beneficial to Apple, he strong-armed the various companies into giving up their macOS license. And in one of the more famous stories, he actually had an extremely heated phone call with the CEO of Motorola, who was the grandson of one of Motorola's founders. And around that time, BOS was actually one of the options available to these clone manufacturers to keep these machines going in the market, although ultimately none of them decided to go that route, which I think is unfortunate because BOS is an amazing operating system, especially for the time. It really makes use of hardware, even kind of questionable, mediocre hardware like this, and is super fast and responsive, especially compared to the macOS of the day. All right, BOS is installed. So now the computer will first boot into macOS, or at least begin to, and then hilariously give us 5 seconds to choose BOS, at which point BOS replaces macOS in memory, and here we are booting into the best operating system of the 1990s. Let's do 800 by 600 so you can see what's going on here. And yeah, here we are in BOS. Of course, the obligatory GLT pot running at a blistering 6.8 frames per second. We can add some more teapots and really test this Motorola. That may have been too many teapots. But BOS 4.5 comes with some really cool demos, like this flight demo, which is actually a 3D flight simulator. And look how good this is. Running on the world's worst Macintosh clone, BOS is just fast, responsive, and awesome. Second player, I never did that before. Oh, whoa, look at that. We've got 2 flight simulators going. Look, I'm controlling both at the same time. Okay, I'm having too much fun with this. And of course, being BOS, we have our POSIX base and quite a nice Unix-like command line. All right, let's see if we can get networking to work. All right, I think we're online. Let's see, terminal, ping google.com. Oh yeah, we're online. Let's start the built-in web browser, net positive, and we will go to frogfind.com. That is my search engine that I built specifically to work on vintage web browsers and really old computers. Let's see, Motorola StarMax 3000. Yeah, we are browsing the web. Awesome. BOS is so good. So that's the Motorola StarMax 3000, and I've got to admit, this is a computer that's kind of hard to love. I really thought I was going to go into this and be like, well, everybody talks crap about this machine, but it has some redeeming qualities. But other than the fact that you can plug a VGA monitor into it and plug a PS2 mouse in, yeah, it's not that good. I mean, the UMax SuperMax C500 beats this thing by a mile in expandability and power, and it was $300 less expensive when new. So I'm glad I have this thing, and it does run BOS pretty nicely, but I can't imagine that anyone would have been happy with this machine when it was new, especially if they knew what other options were out there. In any event, if you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more stuff like this, please subscribe down below, and thank you very much for watching. And a special thanks to Graham, Drew Hamlin, James Laurie, George Rosansky, Jesse Ezell, Matthew Crowell, April White, James Fryman, Andrew Nicholson, Scott Cedarbaum, Frodo Jedi, Lyle Truid, Unknown Soldier 41, Tom Woodfin, Alex Hoffman, Veronica Explains, Paul Spencer, Control-Alt-Reese, Ryan, Chris Biggs, Jason Papez, Scott Thompson, Camel Rakowski, Chris Nelson, Greg from K Mods, Chris Calderon, and Gaspar Heller, who are my highest tiered patrons and all of my Patreon supporters for helping to make these videos possible.